Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us here on Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, where we take a look at what really turns your team into a winning team. I'm your host. My name is Dov Barron. I'm the founder of Full Monty Leadership and one of Inc. magazine's top 100 leadership speakers to hire. I'm an executive mentor, entrepreneur magazine contributor, international business speaker, and your host today. So let's take a look at this. What does it take to turn your team into a high-performing team? What does it take to turn a team around? If you're a regular listener to the show, I want to send you a big thank you for joining us today. You're one of the more than 1.5 million downloads and keeping us at the top as the number one podcast for Fortune 500 and keeping us consistently at the top for family business, next-gen leadership, human resources, and all kinds of great things. Thank you for sharing the show with everyone that you know. And remember, as always, we need your help to stay relevant, so get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. Thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, you are responsible for not only each of the team members, but also the team's cohesion in and of itself. So what would happen if you ran your team like a high-performance sports team? Would you be willing to take a look at your own leadership style? Would you be willing to take at your star players, the people who are like right at the top of the game, and question whether they have a place in the team? How would you coach such a team? Would you be willing to look at what you could learn from your losses as well as your wins? Well, my guest today is Mr. Dunn Yaeger. Dunn Yaeger is a nationally acclaimed speaker, longtime associate editor for Sports Illustrated, and author of no less than 25 books, 9 of which have become New York Times bestsellers. His latest book, Great Teams, 16 Things High-Performance Organizations Do Differently. And I'm sure that one's going to go right to the top as well. As an author, Dunn has written books with, among others, Hall of Fame running back Walter Payton, UCLA basketball coach, the very famous Tom Wooden, baseball legend John Smoltz and Tug McGraw, and football stars Warrick Dunn and Michael Oher. He was the feature of the movie The Blind Side. Dunn left Sports Illustrated to actually pursue a career in public speaking, to take that on and to really embrace that career back in 2008. It's allowed him to share his stories with what it takes to be a winner. He does that, of course, with Fortune 10 companies, cancer surviving groups, all kinds of people from around the world. More than 250,000 people have heard his discussion on what it makes the great ones great. He's also built a corporate webinar program on lessons from great sporting franchises and building the culture of success, as we talk about so often here, and which has naturally led him to his latest keynote, which is what makes great teams great. So let's put your hands together and welcome Dunn Yaeger. Crowd goes wild. Dunn, welcome.
Good, I'm clapping too. That was such a great introduction. Heck, I'll clap for that as well. Thanks, though. Appreciate it so much. Opportunity to be here.
It's great to have you here. So let's start off. Let's sort of backtrack a bit, if that's all right. It's great to have you on. Tell me, first of all, you started out as a writer for sports. Did you have a background before that? Because I'm sure they're not going to sign me up. I don't know any football teams.
No, I did. I played sports through college, and I loved the opportunity, the chance to compete, the chance to be part of a team. But when I came out and I became a writer in for several newspapers in the United States, my background shifted a little bit. I did some work in politics, did some work in business, and in news before ultimately going to work for Sports Illustrated. And they, the Sports Illustrated magazine only has 30 writers in the entire world. And so it's a really small community. To be one of them was a pretty extraordinary opportunity, and I loved it. I was there for 12 years. It was extraordinary. But 2008, they offered an early retirement package for those of us who'd been there for 10 years or more, and I jumped all over that in order to be able to continue to write books, one a year, and then to do between 60 and 80 speeches a year to companies all around the world. So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So what was your own background in sports? You played college. What did you play?
Football.
Football?
Yeah. Well, at a little school in Indiana. Yeah. And I was a very bad player on a very bad team.
Well, that's okay because you played football, which is a game you play not using your feet. Which
right. I know.
You know, I was born in the UK, so I have to say that I'm still biased around football should involve feet. It's just a weird thing. And not for one player, but for all the players. It should involve feet.
That's it. You're always trying to push that whole football thing on the rest of us. Come on. Just because it's the biggest sport in the world, now you want to force it on us. Come on.
Well, actually, the U.S. did okay in the last World. Didn't they do all right, U.S.?
They did a little bit better than normal, yeah. But I don't think anyone will ever mistake us for a world power in that space.
Maybe not yet. It's possible. It is possible. You get enough Brits over here and enough Europeans over here. I mean, that's when you think about hockey. You know, hockey is like, you know, how many you've got Europeans and Canadians winning all the American teams win all the time. So it's possible that you might be the next soccer superstars with all the imports. But you know, if Donald Trump has his way with immigration, you could lose out on that too. That might be the downside of this immigration policy.
There you go.
So you got involved with Sports Illustrated. You obviously have had the opportunity of meeting with some of these amazing leaders. And, you know, you've written books on that, and now you've got the latest one on teams. But I just want to touch on this stuff around some of the leaders you've met. Is there, I mean, obviously some of them are legendary, even for people like me who don't follow sports, with like John Wooden. Is there certain ones that really stand out for you as human beings?
Well, so Coach Wooden would be, you know, he would be right there at the very top. I mean, I had the extraordinary opportunity over the last 12 years of his life. He passed away 5 years ago at 99 and a half years old. But for the last 12 years of his life, I had an opportunity every other month for 12 years. I flew to California to spend a day with John Wooden.
Wow.
And so I've recorded about 500 hours of conversation. We wrote a book together that came out at his 99th birthday. But it was not intended to be a book writing opportunity. It was really about a mentoring relationship.
Wow.
He accepted and worked to develop me and my thoughts around leadership, my thoughts around team building, my thoughts about how to be a better teammate, right, with people. And as he shaped me, ultimately we grew to realize that maybe there was a book we should do together, and we did one on mentoring that came out, as I said, it was the last book that came out while he was alive.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what would you say is the top thing you learned from him about leadership? Because he's I mean, like I said, for me, I'm not a sports guy, but I am a leadership guy. And, you know, I have read some John Wooden stuff, and, you know, for me, you know, you could have picked that guy up and inserted him into any leadership role, political, sports, didn't matter. The guy understood it.
And I think that's the perfect example of what we're talking about here, right? Is that when you really get into the deep conversation about leadership as it relates to these people, you could take John Wooden, you could take Mike Krzyzewski at Duke, you could take Pete Carroll at the Seattle Seahawks. You could take so many of these coaches of sporting teams and insert them anywhere, and they would be extraordinary. Yeah. Why? Because the leadership characteristics required don't vary. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're talking about a Navy SEAL, or if you're talking about a football or a soccer coach, whatever you want to call it. Sure. The truly great ones, they can take this what it means to lead, and they can manage it to almost any audience. And I think that's what really was spectacular. So Coach Wooden's number one lesson for me that he said regularly was that when you start looking at the ability to lead, he actually argued there were a handful of characteristics of what it meant to be a great leader. And number one, you have to be a constant student. True leadership is about constantly growing. If you think you've reached the mountaintop, that's the last day you'll leave, right? He talked about being a teacher, right? He had a phrase around being a teacher as a leader, in which he said often, he said, "You have not taught until they have learned." Many of us think we have taught because we've told you something, right? The truth is that's not teaching. No. Teaching is when your student has learned. And if you really recognize that, he talked about the importance of actually leadership is in many ways a parental role, right? You have to, and parenting requires an understanding. He argued all the time, you cannot lead people you do not know, right?
Wow,
that if you want to lead
agree with that, eh?
You have to be invested in them. He talked about the importance of empathy as a leader. You have to know what they're dealing with and feel what they're dealing with. You can't just walk by every day and expect them to follow you blindly. That's just not going to happen. So he put together what he argued was a really great recipe for leadership. And in fact, I'll tell you what, I put it together one day. I built it as part of a speech, and I built a recipe card based on John Wooden's lessons.
Nice.
And let me make this offer to those who might be watching or listening here to your podcast, that if they want John Wooden's recipe card, what does it take to become a leader? If they'll send me an email, and we can put that email at the end of your show notes or whatever you want to do.
Absolutely.
I will be glad to send them the John Wooden recipe card for leadership. She shared with me, and I would be glad to do it.
That's awesome. Give the email right now. It's okay. Sure. Let's do it. I want people to grab that.
Don W. So it's Don and my middle initial W at team, like as in football team, 180.com, team180.com. Don W at team180.com.
Fantastic. That sounds really awesome.
If they just reference in the note, if they'll reference your show, I will be glad to send it to them.
Fantastic. Well, I'll definitely sign up for that. I definitely want that. I mean, for me, this is my opinion. For me, everything you just said is totally aligned with how I teach and guide around leadership, and that leadership is constant growth, constant development. You're never there. It's relationship and all the things that you got to be a great communicator, but you've got to be compassionate. You've got to have empathy. You've got to know your people. In fact, you've got to love your people, not just know them. You got to love them. And so much of that is in what you just said. And I think that so much of that is lost in leadership today. With you having been around so many of these great sports leaders, and as you said, officially they're sports leaders, but you could pick them up and put them in anything. When you think about them and you think about their impact on you, what do you see as missing today generally in leadership? Because we've got, as I said, we've got corporate leadership, we've got political leadership, we've got leadership in education, we've got leadership across the board. If you were to, and I know it's a massive subject, but if you were to say, based on being around these superstars in leadership, here's what stands out as missing, what would that be to you, Don?
I would argue that the number one missing ingredient in what I see in many leaders today is the ability to listen. It's the ability to listen well. They hear, but they don't listen.
Yeah.
And I think I think that skill set, and it is a skill set, right? To not be thinking in advance what my answer is going to be before you're even done asking the question. That ability to kind of put to reframe your mind to be a good listener is the lost art of leadership today.
Listening with the intent to hear rather than the intent to respond. That's I see that all the time. I mean, example, when this show airs, it will be post the election, but we've all seen the debates and how often nobody's listening.
Right.
Really.
It doesn't matter what the question is. I've already decided what I'm going to say. Yeah. It doesn't matter what your response is. I've already decided here's how I'm going to answer. And I get part of that is the political process. Again, as I said, I love politics, and but I don't love what's happening today. I think what I see is a vacuum in leadership, and I think when so many places, and I know this isn't a political discussion, that I go and I'm in discussion with people, when what they're talking about is what's the least worst choice, right? That's not leadership. When your sales pitch is follow me because I'm not that other person.
Yeah, I'm not
right?
as crappy as they are. That's
Right.
why you.
That. By the way, there's no leadership in that.
No, and you know, and I think it's an important discussion for us because, as I said, this is going to air. We're going to have President Clinton, Hillary Clinton, or we're going to have President Trump. Either way, that's going to be. I mean, that seems to be the only option, unless some miracle that I don't understand is going to happen. And this, I think, is still going to be as relevant because, as you said, it's what's missing in leadership. It's for me. I believe that the leaders are a manifestation of the consciousness of the people. Now, it doesn't matter whether they're politics or whatever it is. So, if your team is crap, and you're leading a team, whether it's a soccer team, a football team, a basketball team, or a corporate team, if that team is underperforming, if that team has bad energy between them, there's only one place to look: the leadership. And so it's the same on both sides. So if we've got those leaders in there, we've put that in place, and we also have the power. And I'm not talking about politics anymore. I'm talking about in any level. Is that I think that so often as a corporate leader, we look at the team and we go, they're just not performing, so I gotta get rid of everybody. Well, guess what, mate? You are the common denominator. And
Yep.
So few leaders are willing to really step into that level of leadership. Well, you know, I'm trying to remember, you would know, of course, the American president who said the buck stops here. Like, did that go out of fashion?
Yes, a long time ago, sadly.
Yeah, the accountability went out of fashion. What the hell happened?
Now let's do this. Let's try to figure out who we can who we can lay the buck on, and let it stop there. You know, which is just again, I think to your point. I mean, you know, when we look at our highest levels of leadership, we've got a large bank in America that's being, you know, where leadership is falling apart because it's or exiting in part because of their, you know, the culture that was created there that was in fact worked completely against the best interest of their customers. You have one of the largest manufacturers of automobiles in the world, right? Volkswagen, whose culture, you know, leadership culture worked against the best interest of those that it was set out to serve, its customers. And one by one, you know, when we start seeing that that's the leadership culture in the world today, you know, we have to look internally. You're right, because we accept way too much of that. And we're not calling for people.
See, that you just said something that I think is really important. We're accepting too much of that.
Yep.
How do we change that, Don? Come on. I mean, you know, you've been around these superstar leadership people, around amazing teams. I'm constantly I'm seen as a pretty sort of in-your-face kind of guy. And I'm always saying, like, you know, we got to stop tolerating. We got to step up. How would you say, how do we get people to wake the heck up and say, this is not okay? The fact that we're down to these two candidates is an example, but it's not okay that the leadership is leaving with $160 million bonus,
right,
and the company is ripping people off. How are we applauding that? How do we, I mean, let's say just one example. How do we get people to stop tolerating, and even not even tolerating, but actually applauding bad leadership? Because I see that as happening.
The only thing that I think we know, and we know this in sports, right? And in the world that I get to live in, is that you vote with your feet, right?
Absolutely.
And your wallet, right? Those are the two places you vote: your feet and your wallet.
Feet and your wallet, yeah.
And so if you refuse to show, if that kind of leadership at that bank so offends you, you move your money, right? If that kind of leadership, and by the way, the one thing that really struck me about that particular situation, obviously we're talking about Wells Fargo here, is the opportunity the board took, which is sad that the board is now, you know, suddenly looking to try to be a good guy. They spent too much time celebrating and reaping the profit of what was going on there, but now they're talking about clawing back part of the bonuses that were there. I love that. I'm glad because that's not something that happens often enough. I mean, in sports, we fire you, right? You're a
Yeah.
coach. You're not winning. The fans are not showing up. They're not spending their money to buy. You're fired. That happens. Unfortunately, in too many of these other venues, we don't have the ability to do that as quickly, right? You'll get an opportunity. Some of your listeners will vote one way or the other in November, but even there, again, are they voting because they're madly passionate about one particular person, or are they voting because that's the least worst option? And I think that's bad. I hope, but the one thing that I love about the cycle of so many things in life is that every once in a while things implode, right? And you get a wake-up call.
Yeah.
And the wake-up call in sports, right? You have a losing season. They fire the coach, and there's the opportunity to start afresh. Maybe what's happening right now, maybe with all of this leadership turmoil and these questions that are now not being asked about politics, but about leadership skills.
Yes.
Maybe somewhere in here we'll say, we got an opportunity 4 years from now to think about leadership again. To think about what do we value and let's look at leadership. Let's not look at sound bites. Let's not look at let's look at your leadership, not your ability to tear down somebody else's leadership.
Yeah, I think that, for you and I, and with my background and your background, I think that we naturally, by virtue of our training experience, are going to look at leadership differently than the person in the street who is, as you say, going to buy the soundbite. But, if you had to vote on the characteristic of leadership, on the what it takes to be a leader, it'd be if everybody suddenly had what we've got, what we've been trained in, I think that you would have very different candidates, not just in politics, but also in business. Like one of the things I talked about at the beginning, and I've spoken a lot about this, it was in my last book called Fiercely Loyal, where I spoke about when I go and talk to a CEO or a top leader and I say, what's more important, culture or customer? And they'll say culture. And I go, well, how come you don't treat them that way? Everybody says my highest, most important asset is my people, but nobody treats them that way. And so that's not leadership. And so that piece around, let's identify what leadership is, because it's like with the teams. Well, you're scoring all the goals or creating all the hoops or whatever it is. And so we've got you as a superstar, but you're a terrible team player. So let's go to the team side of this. How do you guide them around that? Because I see that a lot. Well, this guy is, he's a super producer, or he's got this going on. He runs this division that's the most profitable, but he's a pain in the ass, and his team hate him, and or her. Help us with that.
So the first thing I would tell you is that if that's true, that's a cultural challenge as much as it is a challenge related to that person. Because if what's happening in your culture is that you're rewarding that person for continuing to be high performing, even if they're an ass to everybody else, right? Then there's no disincentive to act that way.
No.
Right? If you really want to change that, you have to change the culture.
Yes.
You can't change them until you change the culture. And you change the culture by announcing what you reward, what you acknowledge, what you appreciate, what you celebrate. When you can say what we celebrate is that person who's willing to be a great teammate, right? That's most important. And so, by the way, and then you have to look for daily victories, right? Celebrating daily victories. So now someone does something not necessarily for their own good, but for the good of the team. Your next job as a leader is to call that out, is to make sure a big deal is made about the person who just did, instead of celebrating the person who's an ass, but who delivers at a high level. Now you need to celebrate the person that lives this new characteristic, this cultural value that you're establishing. As you celebrate it, what happens? People want to be celebrated.
Of course.
So more people will do what they see you celebrating.
Right.
If they only see you celebrating results and the guy can act like an ass, that will be the culture of your organization, because all that matters will be results.
Yeah.
If you start celebrating behaviors that are team friendly, you'll get more team friendly behaviors. So it becomes our job as leaders to identify what we want to see and then celebrate it when we see it.
And I couldn't agree more with you, but I'm going to go the other side for a minute and say, okay, but they come back and say, yeah, but you know what? It's about profit.
But you know what? I think what you'll find is that almost all these great winners we're talking about, these great winning coaches, these great winning corporate executives.
Yep.
You look at Bill McDermott at SAP. You look at Truett Cathy at Chick-fil-A. You look at Gary Kelly at Southwest Airlines. They're more focused on the culture of their organization. And what happens is the profit follows.
Yeah.
If you focus on profit, you may become occasionally profitable, and that's good, right? But what happens is culture is lost.
Yeah.
So the true long-term survivors, the companies that if you look at the companies that are sustainably successful,
it's always
the companies that win, they focus on culture first, and they don't just say it. I loved your line earlier that sometimes leaders will tell you, no, culture matters a lot to me. But then you ask them, well, how do you validate the culture? How do you know that your culture is in fact truly infected the people that work with you? And they can't answer the question. At the end of the day, culture is just is a catchphrase for them.
Yeah, I remember walking into a company we were working with and saying, "Tell me about your culture," and they hand me a brochure and they say, "This is our culture," and I go, "No, this is a brochure."
Right.
They go, "No, this outlines our culture," and I go, "I guarantee it doesn't." And they said, "Oh no, it really does." And I said, "Okay, give me 2 days to come in and wander around as the new person. So, like I've got a job here, okay? Don't give me anything to do. I'm going to wander around. I'm going to be that pain in the ass employee who's going to not actually do any work for 2 or 3 days. But I'm going to find out what the actual culture is. And invariably, it is not what you think it is, because you have a culture, which is in the brochure, and you have a subculture, which is actually what's running things. And a great leader has to be on top of that, has to be in the weeds and understand what's really going on, because the new person comes in and says, "Oh yeah, well, I read the brochure and I guess we got to do this now." And the person says, "Yeah, you know what? That's not really what we do around here. Right. This is what we do." And the problem with living in the high tower as a quote leader is you don't know that stuff. That's the reason I love that show Undercover Boss, because that guy suddenly discovers, you know what? We don't do that. I thought we did. We don't do that. So, it's so vital if we're going to build a team is that, and I really want to hear what you have to say on this. I believe it's vital if we're going to run a team that's successful is that we get off the high horse. Now, not just with this 90s idea of open door, but actually walking in, being part of, examining, and leaders develop cultures. And I always say to my clients, whether you've designed a culture or not is actually irrelevant. You are the culture.
Yep.
Because culture is permission.
These great teams, that's a great line. Culture is permission. I'm writing that down. I'm stealing from you right now.
Thank you.
No,
just give me credit. I'll give you credit.
We say all the time that the culture is going to happen on your team, right? By design or default, right? And that the great teams don't let it happen by accident.
No,
the great teams are very intentional in it. Most teams, I mean, I would venture to guess 90% plus let it happen by default. They let culture become what it is, as opposed to saying, here's what it's going to be. And not just in a brochure, but in the ability, as I said earlier, to celebrate. If you know people anywhere, when I get into the cultural discussion with companies, I ask employees, just as you did that during that 2-day window, what's celebrated around here? What gets you noticed? What gets you promoted, right? Yeah. Conversely, what gets you fired? And if you can answer those 2 questions, and every employee can, right? Any employee that's been in your company for any amount of time can answer those 2 questions. What gets you celebrated? What gets you fired? That's your culture, right? Yeah. That is exactly where you are. And if it may not correlate to what's on the wall, or what's on the brochure, but that's your culture, and that's where you start. Now, if you want to change it, you have to be bold. You have to do. There's a story that ran a couple of weeks ago, and by the time this airs, it will be longer than that ago, on the sports section cover of the New York Times, about a football coach a real football coach. Sorry, not your kind. a college football coach at the University of Houston named Tom Hermans, right? He inherited a program that was abysmal. And a year and a half later, he has them in the top 10 of the country. Top 10. And one of the things he decided to do was he said, everybody says all the time how I love my players, right? I love my players. Well, he started a habit where when his players were walking out of the locker room toward the field, he stopped each player and he kissed them on the cheek. Now, in a manly sport like football, it sounded really weird. And in fact, many of these players told Coach Hermans that it's the first time in their life a man had ever kissed them.
A man had kissed them, yeah.
Right. But over the course of a year and a half, these players who originally blanched at the idea that a guy was going to kiss them now line up and they can't wait to get that kiss because they know that what that means, that guy, he doesn't just say I love you, he exhibits it, right? And that culture change has changed the dynamic of the organization. So one of the things I love about this is we get into this concept that a lot of times we say, here's how we feel, but what are you doing? How are you actively pursuing the change in culture that you're asking others to believe is real? The great ones, as you said, they don't let it happen by default.
As you know, I'm the founder of Full Monty Leadership, which is about going underneath, like stripping off the stuff. So I'm going to go full Monty on you here and ask you, tell me why that hit you so hard, because that was evident. I mean, and I thought it was beautiful, by the way, that when you told that story about that coach kissing his team players on the cheek, that emotionally moved you. Tell us why that was for you.
I think because as I read the story, I mean, I'm a late in life dad. I became a dad just 8 years ago, so I have a little boy and a little girl. But I go to their school, and I love kissing them as I'm dropping them off, as I'm taking them to class, and I know from their conversation how many of their classmates kind of think that's funny, like that a dad and I'm thinking, that's just shameful, right? That's just shameful. And so the idea, I think what really hit me in that, as I read Coach Hermans, was the idea that so many of these young men that are maybe in their late teens, early 20s, are for the first time experiencing that. And I think that's sad. But what I love is that there's somebody out there willing to say, I don't care if it makes you feel uncomfortable. This is how I show what I feel, and let's dispense with all the things that others might think, and let's just realize this is between you and me, and it's real.
Yeah,
I'm only kissing you on the cheek because I truly do love you.
Yeah.
He actually has a great line in the article in which he says there are only two things that get people to do things they might not otherwise do. One is fear, and the other is love.
Yeah.
And he said, I choose love every day.
Yeah, I love that.
Tell me you wouldn't want to play for that guy.
Absolutely.
Right? But that's the point, is that when you create the right culture, now who doesn't want to play for that guy?
Yeah.
I would. I'm 53. I'd figure out a way to get eligibility back.
Yeah, you would do whatever it took to get on.
If I could, I'd go play for him.
Yeah. You talked about before, and it's part of my philosophy, that John Wooden said that in many ways leadership is parenting.
Right.
And, I was asked on an interview where I was being interviewed a few weeks ago, what do you want to be your legacy? And I said, that's a massive question because my legacy is multifaceted. But I said, I'll tell you something. I work with a lot of women who are leaders and a lot of men who are leaders. But if I had to choose something to be on my gravestone, it would be this. Dov was a father to men. Because wow. I know how many men of our age and younger who've never been kissed. I kiss all my male friends on the lips. I'm European, so I kiss all my male friends on the lips. But I kiss everybody on the cheek. Yeah. My clients, when I see them, I hug them, I give them a kiss on the cheek. Because I believe with all of my heart, something I learned from, this must be 30 years ago, and that is that you can't serve those you don't love. Yep. When I work with a client, I say to them, we come to an agreement, work out how we're going to work together, and I say, here's the deal. We're going to work together on a contract, a period of time. At the end of that contract, and this is going to sound weird, if I'm not in love with you, we're not going to work together anymore. And they go, what do you mean? I go, it's nothing romantic. But if I don't feel that level of love for you, I know I can't serve you. You need to go somewhere else. Here's a coach demonstrating that. And I think for you and for me, we get it, that's what freaking leadership is about. It's not about hating the other guy more. It's about leadership is, do you actually feel loved? Are you willing to demonstrate love for those that you lead? And so many leaders are sociopathic and even psychopath. They have a psychopathology and they miss that. That love is the shifting key. It's what makes it all come together. All those inspirational movies that we've all watched about sports, even sports I don't care about. I never watch those movies for the sports. I don't give a shit about the sports. But the leadership is phenomenal. And what's the leadership? It's a leader who had the balls to say, listen, I care. You guys can walk out there, you can pee it all away, but I care. And because I care about you, and these players are turned around. They stop behaving in ways that are self-destructive because of what's missing inside. So when Coach Wooden said that leadership is parenting, I would go further and I would say, this is for me, this is part of what I teach. Leadership is a healing process for both the leader and those you lead.
I'm taking notes, man. I'm a voracious note taker. So leadership is a healing process. I like it.
Yeah, for both the leader and those they lead. We are healing each other's wounds. We are helping each other overcome the crap that's in the way. And your players who are playing that way, whether your players are in the boardroom or your players are on the field, are playing out their crap. They're playing out their wounds, and we got to help them heal that.
I don't know how often you interview people who take notes while you're saying things, but
well, I'm on it, Dunn. Thank you. From 25 books, I'm on it. 9 bestsellers, I'm on it. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, great. No, I think so. Those are some of the things I learned from Coach Wooden.
So tell us some more of these 16 things that these high-performing teams are doing differently that we've maybe not got to yet.
Sure. So the number one answer that comes up over and over again when these great team builders have shared with me why they were able to find sustained success is that the great teams have understand their why. They understand there's a common sense of purpose. They know who they are in service of, and they know why what they do matters.
Yeah.
And if you can find a way to allow your team, see, a lot of times this sense of we know why what we do matters, and we know who it matters to, that exists in the corner office, right? Some executive can say, "Yep, when our product is sold, it makes a difference in the lives of these people," but that doesn't flow.
No.
And in the day-to-day grind of doing all the crap that's being asked of people, there's a complete lost sense of purpose. The great teams never lose their purpose. They have I tell the story often when I discuss this in a keynote speech about a company named Medtronic. It's a medical device company out of Minneapolis.
Right.
And the CEO of the company, longtime CEO, is named Bill George. He presided over the growth of the company from 10,000 employees to 40,000. So incredible growth. But one of the things he shared with me when I asked him, how did you keep purpose as the center of your organization, is he shared this idea that every year they do an event. It's an employee gathering the week after Thanksgiving. And during the event, they carve out 1 hour and they bring in to the facility 6 families that are held together today because the Medtronic device is keeping one of them alive.
Wow.
And the families stand in front of the employees and say thank you.
Wow.
And they say, by the way, and he said every year, some young woman steps up and she grabs the microphone and she looks at our team and she says, because you do what you promised, my daddy got to walk me down the aisle this summer. Right?
Yeah.
Every year, some guy steps up, he says, and thanks them because he said, because your product is exactly what it said, what you said it would be. My grandfather was with us at Thanksgiving, and everybody said he wouldn't be. And at the end of that gathering, they sit these families in the back of the room with pictures and the autographed pictures to the employees, and they're rock stars. But you're an employee of Medtronic, and you're leaving that meeting, and you know exactly why what you do matters.
Yeah.
And you know who it matters to, right?
That is brilliant.
Maybe because the picture of that girl who got to walk down the aisle with her daddy is hanging on your wall.
Yeah.
And in tough times, when you're really struggling, when you got way too much on your plate, and you're able to visualize that you know who you matter to, it makes a difference in the way you come to work every day. And the great teams come to work differently.
That is awesome. I love that. I mean, there's so much talk, and Simon Sinek's book, which is a great book, it starts with why. But I find that very often the purpose is manufactured, and it becomes another version of a crappy mission statement, versus what this company is doing, which is I always say, I was doing a show last week, and I spoke to somebody, and they said, well, is purpose like a mission statement? And my answer is absolutely not. We were working with a corporate team in Europe. I've told this story before, but it's a great one. And working with this corporate team in Europe, they've flown everybody in from around the world. We're in France. We've got this lovely chateau. We're hanging out with everybody. It's very cool. We're feeling very elitist, and it's wonderful. And I said, and the CEO is a global CEO that I was mentoring for a couple of years before I got to work with the team. And so I look at him and I go, the next question I'm going to ask, you can't answer until everybody else is gone. Because I made him go first in everything because he has to lead. But I said, I want you to go last. He goes, okay. So I go around and say, what's the mission statement? I go back, what's the mission statement? What's the mission statement? By the time we're halfway around, he looks like his head's about to explode. He's so pissed off. Because, of course, nobody knows it.
Nobody knows it, right?
And then it gets to him, and, of course, he does know it, and he says it all off. And he's like furious, and he goes, why don't you guys know this? You're the leaders in the company, blah, blah, blah. And I looked at him and said, why would they? He goes, because it's our mission statement. No. Why would they? And he goes, I don't know what you mean. I go, it doesn't mean anything to them. And he goes, well, it should. And I go, should doesn't count. And he goes, well, what do you mean? And I said, listen, a mission statement is something that's designed often by a marketing team, but it's not anything that anybody's emotionally connected to. A purpose has a deep emotional connection. And designing a purpose that actually connects people, emotionally pulls them in, which is what you've just described with this company, for me is like, wow, there's the best demonstration I have heard of how do you emotionally bond your team to the purpose. Because what do? I work at Medtronic. What do you guys make? Oh, we make these devices. Okay, yeah, they're important medical devices, but it's a nebulous concept inside of your head until that girl says, you know what? Because of you guys, my dad walked me down the aisle. Because of you guys, my granddad was at Thanksgiving. Because of you guys, my kid's alive. Whatever it is, I mean, like you can't leave that and not be touched unless you're emotionally dead inside, right? At which point, clear.
Yeah. Simon and I actually talked about this one day, and we were talking about this. Simon obviously focuses a lot on individual whys. What are your individual why? I'm more interested in how do teams rally around a sense of purpose.
Right.
But universally, Simon had this great line. He said, a why is always human, and it's always an act of service.
Yes.
So your why cannot be, we're doing what we do because shareholders need us to, right? We're doing what we're doing because the boss wants to buy a bigger car. We're doing what we're doing because I want to earn an extra 10%. None of those can be your why. The corporate why really has to come down to, it's got to be human. And so it's got to be like that young girl standing in front of the stage. And it's got to be an act of service. And if you feel that you're doing those things, what you find is that people come to work differently.
So how do you, in your work as a speaker, what sort of guidance do you give them for developing that kind of a group why that can pull everybody in? So
one of the questions you ask people is, you ask let's say you've got a group of 15 to work on your team. We offer a pretty easy series of questions that allow you to share them with your team and ask them to privately answer them. Like, who are we in service of? Why does what we do matter, right? And then you gather them up, and they can be anonymous, they can be named, however you want to handle it. But what you discover is, to your point, often they're scattered all over. They have no idea. I mean, they think they're in service of this person. They think the right answer is to say this. Like you, I did a group recently, a technology group in California, and was an executive team. And one answer that came up regularly about why do we do what we do was because they had a CEO who liked buying big and expensive things, and and they wanted to make sure that the part of what they felt of as their purpose was this sense that the CEO needed to buy a bigger island, right? And at the end of the day, there's no purpose in that, right? How do you rally emotionally around that? And when tough times come, those who can rally emotionally in sports or business, they prevail. Yeah. And that's what we're looking for. So what we talked to them about is asking questions, trying to gather, and then once you know, you can't even have this conversation until you start asking questions. No. And if you create a few questions that will provide that sense of understanding of what really matters here, what you'll find is the ability to begin a conversation that's different.
Very cool. Dunn, tell us, for you, like I said, you've been at the top of the game in so many things. What does it get you out of bed?
I'm a storyteller at heart. That's really what I do. I tell stories, and I think my greatest gift is telling other people's stories. And I want to do it in a way that allows people to influence and impact others. And so if I can find the right stories to tell, and I can tell them well, I allow people to change the level of influence they have with other people. And that's really, it's not about my story, it's about their story being told well enough to shape others. And I love that. That is, to me, that's where I find my comfort and my space. That's what gets me up every day.
What does that give you?
Well, first off, it gives me an amazing sense of peace to know that, back to John Wooden, as I mentioned, every other month I'm flying to California for those last 12 years. And toward the end, I never knew if it was going to be the last time I'd see him, because he's 98, 97, Yeah. And you're wondering, might he not be alive when my next appointment comes?
Everyone is potentially the last one. Wow.
Right. So he's 98 at this stage, and I'm there. And I actually remember I was leaving that day, and I said to him, Coach, every time I leave you, I'm a better man than when I arrived. Now, most of us, you'd say that to me or you, most of us would say, oh, thanks. Gosh, that's really awesome. That's beautiful. John Wooden looked at me and he said, make that your standard. Make it that everybody who leaves you will feel that same exact way. And I thought, wow, now there's a burden, right? Yeah. And my job is to make sure that everybody who leaves me is better than when they arrive. And so all of this that we're talking about, the ability to tell stories, the ability to help others tell their story, allow me to live out kind of that sense that every day I want people to leave me better than when they arrived.
Well, that's awesome. And this has been a great interview. I really enjoyed having you on the show. Tell our viewers, our listeners, where they can find out more about you, they find out about your new book, where to get it, and, maybe potentially bring you in to speak. Let them know.
Thank you. Yeah, my website is just donyaeger.com, DONYAEGER.com. And the book is there, the opportunities to learn more about what I do, to maybe get a chance to be part of I blog weekly for forums. I love sharing stories. I love being part of communities, and I'm grateful that you gave me a chance today to be part of yours.
It's been an honor having you. I hope you'll stick around. We're just going to sign off and say goodbye to everybody, but I would love for you to stick around, and you and I will just chat for a minute or two after we finish. I want to thank you, dear listener, for dear viewer, for tuning in. I want to thank Dunn for being on. This has been a great show. And as I say this to you every single time, don't just listen to this in the background. I realize that that's what people do with podcasts. But you know what? This has been filled with gems. Go back, listen again, take some notes, wake up. Let's become the leaders that we not only need to be, but the ones that our heart and our soul and our deepest being calls out for us to be. And this is an opportunity. You've got some real nuggets here in this show, so I really hope that you'll dive into it. And if you are truly serious about embracing the kind of positive disruption that builds a culture that develops the next generation of leaders, not into who they just want to be, but who they need to be at that soulful level, and become evangelical about your organization and what it is that your organization stands for, then reach out to me, Dov Barron, through fullmontyleadership.com. And remember, you can also stop by matrix.fullmontyleadership.com, matrix like the movie, .fullmontyleadership.com, where you can get my Authentic Leadership Matrix self-assessment tool. It has a 197 value. It's in beta, so we're letting you have it as our gift for tuning in. simply go to matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. I want to thank you for joining us here at Executive Leadership and Loyalty Tips, Full Monty Leadership interview series. As I said, I'm your host, Dov Baron. Thank you for sharing the show with everybody that you know. Remember, we always need your help in staying relevant, so please go to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And of course, you can come on over and subscribe now to our YouTube channel, Dov Baron Full Monty Leadership. Connect with us on LinkedIn and on Twitter. Twitter is @TheDovBaron. I publish new blogs, videos, and articles every Tuesday and Thursday. So until next time, this is Dov Baron of Full Monty Leadership saying to you, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you can develop a team that is purpose-driven in every possible turn. And I'm out.